me moleste mosquito, huélese para allá. Mosquito bonito, ya no puedo más. Como no me dejes, te voy a matar. No me moleste mosquito, no me moleste mosquito, no me moleste mosquito, huélese para allá.
Ay, 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 toma. No molestarás más.
No me moleste mosquito, no me moleste mosquito.
When mosquitoes take a nosedive,
Date pa' allá.
the city of Strasbourg, as it is today. Around the cathedral, the city has retained its ancient charm. From the splendid facades to the half-timbered houses of the Petite France district, nothing seems to have changed here since the 18th century. In 1770, the German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe climbed the city's venerable cathedral. Intoxicated by the magnificent panorama, he wrote,
I see them still spread out before me, the meadows studded and laced with fine, densely foliaged trees, that lush wealth of vegetation that follows the course of the Rhine, marking its banks, its islets and islands. The river, in places outgrowing its original bed, washes right under the solitary willows. Right alongside, the woods and meadows in the sleepy haze of the dawning day. Brilliant red poppies, floral adornment for the edge of the fields, and the buzz of insects around the blossoms.
200 years later, and the landscape still exudes its familiar charm. The meadows along the river now serve as a recreation area and as lungs of the city. But farther away, beneath the poplar trees, you might think that time has stood still. Yet nothing, and certainly not nature, despite its peaceful countenance, is without its troublemakers. Goethe, on his romantic boat trips with Friederike, also found the Rhine mosquitoes a vexing nuisance. He recorded his disagreeable experiences for posterity.
Quite without mercy, we lowered the cool inhabitants of the Rhine into the pan, into the sizzling fat. And we might perhaps have settled for an unseemly length of time had the dreadful Rhine mosquitoes not driven us away.
And today, the Rhine mosquito is every bit as vicious and annoying as it was then.
Mosquito bonito, ya no puedo más. Como no me dejes, te voy a matar. No me moleste mosquito. Huélese pa' allá.
The swarms will attack and go on attacking until the last of the picnic party has fled for cover, leaving them lords of all they survey. The dance of the vampires. In the most heavily infested areas, the mosquito population is closely monitored. Here, for example, with the help of a gauze screen. Scientific surveys show that in the space of just 2 minutes, a human being here will attract up to 800 mosquitoes. The predominant species is the Rhine mosquito Aedes vexans. Perhaps even more than most other organisms, this species of mosquito has adapted perfectly to the particular characteristics of this biosphere and to the moods of unpredictable Mother Nature. Nearly every spring, the waters of the Rhine flood the low woodland on either side of the river. Father Rhine washes over the low-lying countryside, and in doing so, provides ideal breeding conditions for the Rhine mosquito. When the first eggs hatch, the countdown begins for a new mosquito plague. The birth in slow motion. Frail and delicate, but born to be a vampire. To secure the survival of the species, a mosquito needs to suck blood. This female has literally drunk her fill. She's now 3 times her normal weight. Humans, animals, any warm-blooded creature that strays here is a welcome victim, because no meal of blood means no offspring. During egg-laying, the female's ovipositor, or laying tube, performs precision work. Inside it, nearly 200 eggs can mature, and when the time comes, these eggs are deposited singly in the ground, or, as here, on bits of plants. Clutches, like these egg ships here, are typical of the house mosquito. A few days later, the first signs of movement in the mosquito cradle, and almost at once, the eggs start to hatch en masse. The larvae, at first translucent and fragile as glass, develop quickly. Nature has equipped them with everything they need to prosper in an aquatic environment. Their outsized mouth tufts create eddies in whose wake finely distributed food particles get caught up. The abdomen narrows to form a breathing tube, acting like a straw to provide the larva with additional oxygen. Once the larva is fully grown and has eaten enough to grow plump and round, it molts and turns into a pupa. Like a shirt that's become too small, the old larval skin is shrugged off. And after so much exertion, it's time for a breather. To tank up with oxygen, the pupa hangs with its horn-like breathing tubes just below the surface of the water. The pupal stage is very brief, a short run-up to the big moment in the mosquito's life. After leading a purely aquatic existence, it now pokes its head for the first time into its new element. Millimeter by millimeter, the young mosquito emerges from its pupal sheath. Legs, antennae. Slowly but surely, the delicate shape of an adult unfolds. To make room for its first meal, the newly hatched mosquito excretes. The life cycle is complete, and with her first meal of blood, the young female lays the foundation for a new generation of mosquitoes. The males, in the meantime, have gathered in dancing swarms. Springtime on the Upper Rhine. Whether mosquitoes will be a nuisance again depends on how high the river rises. Not infrequently, the water samples prove to contain hundreds of larvae. Here, mosquitoes have been a pest summer after summer. In a bid to tackle the recurrent problem, 60 local authorities on the Upper Rhine got together and formed a joint action group. But how can the mosquitoes be controlled without endangering other forms of life? From the flooded woodland banks of the Rhine to the Negev desert. Here, the Bedouins say, rainfall is so rare that you can count the drops. The scanty precipitation is just enough to produce a bit of scrub for the goats. Here and there, there's the odd patch of green. Agricultural oases, but only where man has irrigated and fertilized. Here, not far from the maize fields of the Salem kibbutz, biologist Dr. Yoel Margalit made a discovery.
בחודש אוגוסט של קיץ 1976 גיליתי בשלולית בנגב.
In a puddle, I found lots of larvae, pupae and adult mosquitoes, all dead or dying.
A seemingly unimportant observation. But how often has such an observation marked the beginning of a major discovery? Countless series of experiments in many laboratories around the world came up with the same surprising finding. The insects were the victims of a disease which only attacks mosquito larvae, a disease unknown up to then. The next step was to identify the cause. From dead larvae, microbiologists succeeded in obtaining a pure culture of the bacillus. They named it Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, BTI for short. But how do these microbes produce the poison that kills the larvae? Only an animation sequence can make the answer clear. Inside the bacillus, with its thread-like chromosomes. Under normal circumstances, the bacillus reproduces continuously, by fission. But if ambient conditions deteriorate, spore formation takes place. At the same time, protein elements are synthesized, and these combine to form a fast-growing protein crystal. And it's this crystal, shown here in blue, that contains the actual larval poison. Just a pinch of BTI in a laboratory demonstration. The mosquito larvae immediately start to feed. Let's follow the BTI crystals down the larva's throat. In the intestine, proteolytic enzymes break down the BTI crystals. And one of the products turns out to be the larval poison. The wall of the infected intestine cell is gradually destroyed, admitting water that finally ruptures the cell. Hole after hole appears in the intestinal wall. Internal decomposition continues relentlessly. Less than 20 minutes later, the normally active larvae are reduced to a state of apathy. And before long, they're floating lifeless on the surface, drifting with the wind and waves. BTI versus mosquito, a battle of the kind found so frequently in nature, and one that finally pointed the way to a new form of biological pest control.
Combating mosquitoes not when they've reached maturity, but while these transmitters of dangerous diseases are still at the larval stage. That would certainly be a new approach. The only question is, when do we use BTI?
Scientists in conference. The topic of discussion, the spore content of the future BTI compound. After all, bacilli produce spores, and if kept in a permanent spore-producing state, might they not one day represent a danger? To eliminate that possibility, a sporeless mutant was bred.
Here, on the wild variety, you can see the fully developed spore. And here we have the mutant. Only a preliminary spore has been formed, and that will decompose when the bacteria cell undergoes lysis. We expect the sporeless mutant to be significantly safer in terms of environmental impact.
Environmental safety is only one of the advantages of the sporeless mutant. The other is that it's even more effective against mosquito larvae, as field tests have confirmed.
How far have we got in optimizing it?
Finally, it's the turn of the biotechnologists, whose job it is to produce the sporeless mutant on an industrial scale. The solution? Mass production in fermenters. Biotechnology, microbes as lab assistants, not as in the past to help produce valuable drugs, vitamins and protein, but now in the service of alternative pest control. On the Upper Rhine, BTI is already being used to combat the Rhine mosquito. Under expert guidance and with military precision, the Joint Action Group constantly monitors an area of more than 20,000 hectares and, if necessary, sprays it. In the more inaccessible areas, helicopters are used. But there's no need to worry. What's raining from the skies here is pure biology. Pure biology? Then how has the wildlife of the Rhine meadows reacted? The answer? Very calmly. The search for food goes on. And there's no need for any fears about the offspring. The biological compound leaves no residues, so there's no subsequent risk to other aquatic organisms. Not even to this rare relic from prehistoric times. Fish, the main predators of aquatic larvae, can also feed safely on the BTI-infected mosquito larvae. Biologist Dr. Becker, scientific director of the Rhine Mosquito Project.
Protecting mosquito predators and environmental safety must have priority in any anti-mosquito campaign. And the BTI method meets this requirement perfectly, as our regular checks have shown, because it systematically kills only the mosquito larvae and has no effect on any other organisms. The impressive results obtained here along the Upper Rhine are mainly due to the use of the BTI products, which provide a form of pest control that is viable both ecologically and economically.
Wherever it's still to be found, unspoilt countryside has to be preserved. Today, nature has to be protected, even where it once posed a mortal threat to our forefathers. A good 100 years ago, the Upper Rhine was plagued by swamp fever, better known today as malaria.
Sire, les troupes de la rive gauche du Rhin, officiers et soldats, sont décimés en grand
Your
nombre.
Majesty, the troops of the left bank Rhine garrison, officers and men alike, are being struck down in large numbers by swamp fever.
The silent graves of the victims are the only traces of the malaria that once haunted the Rhine Valley. elsewhere in the world, around the equator, the disease still claims countless lives. Family and friends are powerless to help. Will this young child face the same fate? It's estimated that more than 100 million people fall victim to the disease every year. The time bomb of malaria ticks mercilessly on. In Africa, Asia, and South America, teams trying to combat the disease find the same depressing state of affairs. Bacillus and carriers are becoming increasingly resistant to the weapons that only yesterday still proved effective. Above all, the mosquitoes that transmit the disease have become resistant to conventional insecticides. And it's the same story with a host of other tropical diseases. For example, in Africa, where one of the world's most horrific diseases is encountered, also transmitted by blood-sucking insects. Onchocerciasis, river blindness. These people face a life of permanent blindness. They've been robbed of their eyesight by a tiny threadworm. Once the disease reaches an advanced stage, there's nothing any doctor can do. Homes and villages are abandoned, left to the curse that seems to hang over them. The river plains are deserted, abandoned settlements, derelict huts. All that remains is a sad memory of happy times now past. Here on the Ivory Coast and in Burkina Faso, the worst affected areas were those where conventional insecticides were no longer effective against the flies transmitting the disease. BTI Project Onco, a joint project of the World Health Organization and the chemical industry, brings new hope. BTI is sprayed over the rivers. The aim is to combat the larva of the black fly, the insect which transmits river blindness. It only lives in fast-flowing water. The larvae anchor themselves to the riverbed by means of a sticky secretion capable of withstanding even the strongest current. To cover the more remote stretches of river, a helicopter and a skilled pilot were called for. And again, BTI came up to all expectations. The local inhabitants were able to return to the riverbanks. Now they're cultivating the land again and raising the crops they need to feed themselves. They're again putting down roots, confident in the future. Village life is returning to normal. The abandoned valleys are coming back to life, freed from the curse of a merciless disease. The sun will rise again tomorrow on all living creatures, both the good and the bad. But nature doesn't recognize this human scale of values. If she threatens us, we will defend ourselves, in the future too. But wherever we are forced to take action, we need to ensure that environmental impact is always kept to an absolute minimum. Because nature as a whole, nature indivisible, has to be respected and preserved.